Hi, my name's Lawrence. I'd like to tell you how I became a Christian 65 years ago. It's been a long road in my early days and a very sad road. I was born in Oxford, the second son of Mum and Dad. Mum and Dad moved up to Manchester in the 1930s and we lived on a massive estate called Wythenshawe Estate. My life was a very sad life. Mum and Dad was always fighting. In fact, it was my dad's fault, always screaming and shouting at my mother. And my dad was always hitting my mother. So Dennis and I used to hide under the table crying most of the time. Unfortunately, my dad was a gambler. And as we were growing up, we never had any money or hardly any clothes, hardly anything to eat. My dad used to come home with hundreds of pounds many a time, and 2 days later he had lost everything. And always my mother was saying, give me some money to feed these children. Well, by time then there was another 4 children, so I was brought up in a home of 6 children. I was dyslexic. Then they didn't know about dyslexia. I couldn't read or write. In fact, I couldn't really read and write until I was nearly 30 years of age. One day, coming home from hiking with a friend of mine, we passed a little gospel hall and a man outside was sweeping the pavements, and he said to us, "Have you been hiking, lads?" We said, "Yes." He said, "Why don't you come in? We've got coffee and biscuits and tea and cake." And we thought, oh yeah, let's just go in. So we took our rucksacks off, put them at the front of the church and, this little gospel hall, and we had biscuits and cake, and we thought it was wonderful, all for nothing. But I noticed something about the people that were there. They had an aura about them. They were very kind and polite and really wanted to talk to us and that had an effect on me, because my life was so traumatic at home. I didn't think that people like this existed. I had a terrible time at school with being dyslexic. I was beaten constantly by the teachers. In fact, they used to shake me like a rag doll. Unfortunately, the only thing I could do at school was say my alphabet backwards. I couldn't even say it forwards, and I didn't know why I was like this. So they got so infuriated at school with me, they used to lock me in an attic when the school inspector was coming round or the headmaster come round to see how his pupils were doing. And they let me out after a few hours, and they did this on a regular basis. So this is how I grew up in Wythenshawe. So one day when us 4 children came home from school, Mother wasn't there. So we said, "Where's Mother?" And my dad said, "Oh, she's left." And then as little children we just thought, well, she'd just gone away for a bit. We weren't so sure. But then it dawned on us that she'd left for good. And all I did was cry all the time for my mother, and it had a profound effect on me. So I started to get into trouble all the time. I was in trouble with the police as a little boy. Police were always knocking on the door. Dennis was in trouble. We all had this sadness about us. When I went in the army in 1954, I was 2 years in the Middle East. On coming home, I thought about these kind people at this little church, and I thought, I'd like to meet them again. So one day, one Sunday evening, I went up to this little church and they invited me in, and I heard this man speaking about how Jesus loved me. Now, love in my life was zero from everywhere. And I thought, oh, does Jesus love me? And after the service, a man come up to me and he said, would you like to take Jesus into your heart and life? And I thought, oh yeah, these are all nice people. I want to become like these people. So they took me into a little back room, tiny little back room, it was only about 1 metre wide, and there was all the mop buckets and cleaning materials in the back. So they moved these mop buckets and brushes and that on one side so I could kneel down. And this man prayed with me, and I said, yes, Lord, I'd like to become a Christian. And when I look back over the years about where I became a Christian, I often think that, God, amongst the mop buckets, God cleaned me out. But the next day, I knew I was different. Something had happened to me. It was like something had got into me that I just felt secure and happy and free. And I kept going to this little church, and about 2 weeks later my sister Margaret said to me, oh, something's happened to you. You're different, Laurie. And she came to the church with me, and she made a commitment to Christ. Now, leaving it there and going back to my childhood when I was about 8 years old, when my mother left home, I was so unhappy. I decided to get a case and put some bread in it and a pot of jam and some butter and a knife, and said to my sister, we're going to run away from home. And my sister was all for it because she was always crying. So we ran away from home, and I was missing for 3 days and 3 nights. And we were living under railway bridges for 3 days and 3 nights, and of course everybody was looking for us and the police were looking for us. And they caught us in a place called Poynton in Manchester, a place going up towards Derbyshire. And this nice policeman came up to me and says, right, you children, come with me. And I think he took us to his house, and he made us a cup of cocoa and talked to us in a nice, loving, kind way. And I often think of Doc Green. And he was so nice, and I thought, here's another nice person that's dealing with us in a loving, kind way. And it made me feel, there's something about people that are kind and nice. They have an aura about them to keep you at peace. And it was just wonderful. And of course we were brought home, and I was a hero actually by all the lads at school, because I'd run away from home, and everybody wanted to talk to me about running away from home. And many years later, when I married my wife, we went down to Manchester to look at microfilms about, it was in all the papers, and there it was in the papers. It was said, babes in the wood found. So I was one of the babes in the wood, and I was about 8 years of age. Well, coming back to my testimony about my mother leaving us, that had a devastating effect upon us all. I was in bed one day, Saturday morning. We were just getting up, my wife and I, and the phone rang. I had a phone at the side of the bed, and I picked the phone up and says, hello, and a voice said, I bet you don't know who this is. And I immediately said, it's my mother, after 45 years. How did I? Don't you think that's amazing? I recognise my mother's voice after 45 years. And I often think in the Bible where it says, my sheep hear my voice, because I was like genetically connected to my mother. Oh, after 45 years. So of course, I told all my brothers and sisters, and she was living in Winchester. She was a cook for a boys' school in Winchester. So my wife and I went down to meet her, and she still had some of a beautiful golden reddish hair. All us children had bright red hair from my mother's side. And of course we hugged and cried, and it was wonderful. And a few months later my mother came up to stay with us for a while, and she was surprised that I had become a pastor of a church. Oh, she said, wonderful. And Margaret had been a missionary in Malaya for 10 years as well. And she said, wow, my children being in the church, wonderful. So she said, I'd like to come to your church. The night she came to my church, she became a committed Christian. I have a wonderful photograph of her standing on the pulpit with a big sign at the back saying Jesus saves and satisfies, and she became a committed Christian. Don't you think that is amazing? And I always thought, as a young boy growing up, I wish I knew where my mother was, where she died. I'd love to take a bunch of flowers to her grave, and I always prayed to God that I'd love to find where my mother's grave was. And my mother was alive. And God brought us all together. And the amazing thing, listen how God works in a wonderful way. When I found my mother, I said to her, why did you call me Lawrence, Lawrence? She says, oh, I called you after Lawrence of Arabia. And I didn't know until my mother told me she was a classical poet. And we lived in Oxfordshire, that's where I was born, about 6 miles from where Lawrence of Arabia had his house. And she, with some other writers and poets and that, used to go into some rooms where Lawrence came to have a talk to people. Now, I was in her stomach at that time, and Lawrence died a few months just before I was born. And she put her hand on her stomach. I watched her put her hand on her stomach. She said, when she was pregnant, she said, if this is a boy, I'm going to call him Lawrence. And of course, in 1935, Lawrence popped out. 29th of August 1935, Lawrence had died just a few months before as a crash on his motorbike. Now, Lawrence served his time in Arabia. And the amazing thing about it is, when I went into the army, I went in as a cook. And I served my time in Arabia and Libya and Egypt. Don't you think that is phenomenal? My mother was a cook. I never knew her, and I became a cook. And I became a first-class cook. And you know, at the time, I could hardly read and write because of this thing called dyslexia. I failed my theory test when I was training in the army to be a cook. But I was so good at remembering things, I had a total recall of everything I saw or heard. And the instructor said, listen, you're such a good cook. It doesn't matter about your theory test. The troops would like it on a plate, not a piece of paper. So they passed me. I served my time, most of my time, in Tripoli or Tripolitania. I was stationed at Azizia Barracks in Tripoli. I started in the OR's cookhouse, that means the other ranks. Then I went to the sergeant's mess because I was such a good cook. And then I went to the officer's mess because I was such a good cook. I became the colonel's private cook before I left the army. Let's just think of that. Coming from being what everybody says I was, a dummy and ignorant. And you know, when I left school, they said to me, you will never become anywhere. And one teacher said, Bradley, you'll finish up on the end of a rope one day, I'm telling you. That's how they told me. But I haven't finished upon the end of a rope. I've finished upon a ladder going up to heaven. Jacob's ladder. Wonderful. And I have had a wonderful time. I'm now an author of 3 books. I've translated some of the New Testament from Greek or let me say, I've translated some of the words in the New Testament that's in English, the proper meanings from the Greek language, so people can understand what Jesus was really saying in his day. I wrote 2 books, one on purple. Whose purple robe was it that was put on Jesus? And I'm writing a book now on plastic, the devastation it's causing in our seas. I've just finished it now, and we're going to print it soon. That's if I can afford it. Anyway, I'm just like anybody else. I'm as happy as a sandboy In two weeks' time, I'm 85 years of age, and I've had a wonderful, happy, brilliant life. I have wonderful Christian friends, and it was their kindness that caught me. For whoever we are in Christ, it's loving kindness that emanates out from you to others, to empathise and understand where they're up to. And because of what I went through in life, I was able to empathise with poor people that were going through the same condition that I had been through in life. So all these problems that you might have in your youth or growing up will all enhance you in the future, where people will say, I understand where you're going through. It's done me the world of good. Thank you, Jesus, for coming into my life and my sister's life. And I've been able to lead many other people to Christ through what I went through, because they were going through it. And I had shown them a better way of life. Thank you for listening to my testimony. Thank you.